Listen up, Democrats.
You are fake news.
And lies and facts. Save our democracy from right-wing hypocrisy. Keep our integrity. Embrace our diversity. Never be a down. We always come back. So listen up, Democrats.
Hello, welcome to Progressive Oregon, a weekly engagement broadcast on progressive issues in Oregon. My name is Larry Taylor, and I'm here today with my co-host Betsy, maybe, as soon as she joins us. If you would like to ask questions during the show, go to the Uphill Media channel on YouTube and type your questions into the chat window, and somebody will relay them to us, and we will do our best to answer them. Today, we're going to talk about the Pledge of Allegiance. That's pretty much our main topic. This occurred to me recently when I was thinking about why don't we have oaths that people take when they take these positions, like within the Democratic Party. And I realized that we actually do. We just recite these words and we don't think about what they mean. And so what we recite at the beginning of every Democratic meeting I go to, and there's probably somewhere between 30 and 50 of those a year, amongst other opportunities, we say the Pledge of Allegiance. So then I started thinking about the words of the Pledge of Allegiance, something which I have never actually done because I've just been reciting this like everybody does for my entire existence. And I realized that buried in there is the tie between the pledge and what we have in terms of our country and the concept of the rule of law. So the Pledge of Allegiance is, I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. So the background of the Pledge of Allegiance does have some compromising aspects to it, but really if we rise above all that and just think about what the pledge is and the concepts behind it and really the intent, you can kind of understand it. So the Pledge of Allegiance, as it exists in its current form, was composed in 1892 by Francis Bellamy, who was a Baptist minister, a Christian socialist, and the cousin of the socialist utopian novelist Edward Bellamy. Very interesting that we had socialists over 100 years ago. The other interesting thing is that the words "under God" were inserted by Congress in 1954 at the suggestion of President Eisenhower as part of the war against atheist communists. So before 1954, we did not have the "under God" piece. So the key words of the pledge is the first part, I pledge allegiance, and then there are other stuff about the flag, and the flag is a symbol of the republic. But then it says, to the republic for which it stands. So to me, the key words are, I pledge allegiance to the republic. And why do we do that? Well, because the republic is the United States of America, and it was the first country that was created based on the concept of the rule of law. If you think back to all the European countries, they were basically monarchies, and some of them, during the Great Enlightenment, lurched their way towards democracies in one form or another. But even the United Kingdom doesn't have a constitution. It's not written down. They just have basically a gentleman's agreement on what they do. And so they go into great angst when they come upon issues like Brexit because the norms are being broken, but the norms aren't written down. But we are a country that started out with the Constitution that was written in 1878, I believe, and it was a product of a deliberative assembly based upon agreed upon rules of parliamentary procedure. So they took all of the key learnings that they got from Parliament and they used them to come together in a way that could produce a constitution in a deliberative format, and they didn't resort to pulling out guns and beating each other with canes. That was saved for Congress later. So what the words mean. So we are a country bound to rules that we write. And rules are comprised of words that have meanings defined in dictionaries. Or if you want to have your own special definition, you can define them in whatever rules you set up. If you look at Oregon Statute 248.002, there's a bunch of definitions so that it's very clear and very specific about what they are referring to. definitions are not elastic entities stretched to fit special circumstances. They have very precise meanings. And we have this assumption, things that you don't think you need to say, but you have this basic assumption when we speak English is that when I say a word, you generally understand the commonly accepted meaning. And so then we come to oaths. So we have, everyone gets to watch the president take an oath when he takes office on January 20th. And all of our elected officials, including county commissioners and presumably people to things like water boards, also take an oath to uphold the law. But as citizens, we don't have an oath that we take. And for parties like the Democratic Party, we don't have an oath that the officers take when they are elected, but they do recite the Pledge of Allegiance. And so the Pledge of Allegiance becomes our oath that we take. So why I am talking about this is because we have a problem with the Democratic Party. It's basically dysfunctional. Many people have lost complete trust in the leadership. It was fragile before we went into the current year, and now it is basically broken. But the problem is when you break the rules under your oath, you are breaking the oath that you took to uphold the rules of this organization. What holds together organizations generally is a leader. So we have a leader of the Democratic Party, and the role of the leader is to take the will of the people, because the electorate, which is the State Central Committee, is the governing body. And so the role of the chair is to do what the electorate wills. But to earn the trust of the State Central Committee, you have to have integrity, honesty, and character. And people with integrity, honesty, and character do not break the rules. That the trust that we have in our leadership is very fragile. And so that's why it is very important that when you take a role in leadership, you conduct yourself with uncompromising integrity. The State Central Committee, again, is the governing body of the Democratic Party of Oregon. And like every deliberative assembly defined in things like Robert's Rules of Order, the State Central Committee allocates power to various officers and committees, and powers that are not allocated are retained by the State Central Committee. So the State Central Committee, or at least a majority of the committee, holds all of the power, and then we allocate that power out to people because the State Central Committee doesn't want to make every decision, but it does want to make some decisions. And those decisions that it would like to make, it has not given to somebody else. So then we come to, what do we mean when we use words? So we recently had a situation where the President of the United States declared an emergency at the southern border, even though it was actually less chaotic than it has been. It's a situation that has been going on for years, really. And so when he declared it was emergency, there was a lot of consternation, because an emergency, according to Merriam-Webster, is an unforeseen combination of circumstances or the resulting state that calls for immediate action. You have to do something because it's an emergency, not because of other circumstances. What we had our leadership do is bend the interpretation of the bylaws. So if you look at Section 8, called electronic meetings, it says, notwithstanding any other provision in this article, an emergency meeting may be conducted by telephone or video conference, subject to the call of the chair or majority approval of the administration committee. So emergency meetings can be done electronically. If it's not an emergency, it can't be done electronically. So then the question is, was the June 18th State Central Committee meeting an emergency? So if we go back to the previous meeting where we got together in Prineville, there was a motion passed for an adjourned meeting, to adjourn to a meeting 30 days out. And so the Democratic Party of Oregon had 30 days in which to find a physical location. Over the years, the Democratic Party of Oregon has rented dozens of facilities across the state. There was no parameters given on where in the state that it could have been held. We could have had it again in Prineville. We could have had it in Portland. We could have had it at a high school. We could have had it at one of the union halls. But there are literally dozens and dozens of locations that we've used in the past. And so the claim coming from the leadership was that no space could be found. In addition, the meeting was called 20 days in advance of the June 18th date. So there was a requirement for a meeting notice, but with a call 20 days in advance, it means that there's no immediate action. And so there was an email sent out justifying this because of cost, and it was too onerous for the staff to find a location, and they couldn't find a location, and a bunch of interesting reasons, but it wasn't nothing that constituted an emergency. And in addition, the DPO received significant feedback that a physical in-person meeting was really preferred. A lot of people wrote in and said, you know, an electronic meeting like this is going to be a mess. So what happened? June 18th rolled around, 133 state central committee delegates called into the meeting. The meeting lasted 2.5 hours. It accomplished nothing. On a conference call system not approved by the State Central Committee and using an electronic voting system not approved by the State Central Committee. The conference call system itself continually dropped participants and would not let some people join on the call for whatever technical reason, depriving them of their right to participate. And the electronic voting system gave incorrect vote counts, just as previously happened at the May 2nd Executive Committee meeting. It was extremely frustrating because we spent a good portion of the meeting listening to electronic feedback. There was no way to verify votes because we were not in a room. You cannot, in an electronic meeting, look around the room and make sure that the vote count is even approximately accurate. And especially when you get to things that require a 2/3 vote, it's you really need a physical count if there's any kind of closeness in the vote. So that's strike two. So what happened ultimately is that we had a disaster meeting in Prineville where nothing really got accomplished. We had a second disastrous meeting on June 18th, and we really cannot have another. So it is really incumbent upon the leadership to make sure the next meeting is correct. But behavior since then has not exhibited any acknowledgement that things need to change. So if we look at the powers allocated to the Rules Committee, which you can find in the DPO bylaws, the Rules Committee is chartered to do 3 things. It reviews the bylaws regularly and recommends amendments. Number two, out of 3 things, the only 3 things it does, number 2 is proposes the rules and procedures for state conventions. Those rules and procedures are to be approved by the delegates of those conventions. And number 3, reviews the bylaws of prospective special group caucuses to ensure that they, meet the basic requirements of the DPO. Only 3 things that the Rules Committee are allowed to do. And if you read how to interpret things like bylaws, if something is enumerated, there's an assumption that thought was put into this and that nothing was inadvertently skipped. So if something needed to be added that they do, then the body would do that. If we look at the delegate selection plan, it is entirely rules and procedures for state conventions for selecting delegates to the 2020 Democratic National Convention. Somehow people have divided their thought process into thinking that there are 2 kinds of plans of rules and procedures and that one is separate than the other. But no, there is one Rules Committee and there's one committee that is assigned to do this work. In addition, if you read the parliamentary authority, it says a special committee may not be appointed to perform a task that falls within the assigned function of an existing standing committee. Pretty plain English. I don't know how anyone can read this and interpret this otherwise, but it's like we are dealing with the Flat Earth Society. As much as we point out the English of these things that govern our behavior, which we have taken oaths to do, we have people who who think that because they want to do something else, they can ignore these words. The other argument that has come into play is who is a member? And this one was flabbergasting. So when in the parliamentary procedure, it says when the chair appoints a committee, no vote is taken on the appointees except any who are not members of the assembly. In cases where there is no prior authorization for the chair to appoint non-assembly members to the committees, either in the bylaws or in a motion directing the appointment of the particular committee. But the chair must announce the names of the committee members to the assembly, naming the chairman of the committee first, and until such announcement is made, the committee cannot act. That means that the special committee that the prior chair had established was not authorized to meet and develop the delegate selection plan because the then chair, had not shared and basically sought approval that non-members could be appointed to this committee to write our delegate selection plan. But aren't all Democrats members? So this was the point that was brought up in our Rules Committee meeting, which, again, I feel like we're arguing with the Flat Earth Society. What was referred to was the Oregon statute. So if you first look at the bylaws, which defines the membership of the assembly, and the assembly is the state central committee, there's half dozen ways in which people can be members, but none of them are just being a Democrat. You have to be elected. There's chairs of there's delegates coming from caucuses, but there is a specific way in which a finite number of people can be members of the assembly. What was cited was that the Oregon statute states that a member means an individual who's registered as being affiliated with the political party. But clearly, if you think through this, this does not mean that every Democrat in Oregon is a member of the State Central Committee. Otherwise, what would happen is that the bylaws would have to change because the Oregon statute is the overriding authority of bylaws, but we have not done that. The State Central Committee has bylaws which state specifically how 166 to 170 people can be members, but it does not say that every Democrat is a member. And so you cannot just say because the Oregon statute says the term member is applied to every Democrat that there is this assumption that any appointee to a special committee of the Democratic Party of Oregon is a member, because it specifically says a member of the assembly, and the assembly is the state central committee, and those were not adhered to. So again, it's like we are arguing with the Flat Earth Society until we all can look at English and walk away with the same interpretation. We're not going to be a happy family.
No, but can I just simplify the logic here real quick? Larry's going around and around, but the point here is that by that logic, I'm a member of every committee. I get to be a member of the executive committee, the admin committee, whatever it is, all the way on up to top, because it removes, what's the point of elected positions if just being a member of the Democratic Party allows me to enter any committee? That's not even logical. That's ridiculous. Sorry, it's just ridiculous.
Thank you, John, for reinforcing. So what does all this mean? So the special committee that was illegally established to write the delegate selection plan also illegally developed the delegate selection plan because the prior chair had appointed non-members of the assembly that were never approved by the assembly. And the delegate selection plan was inappropriately approved at a non-emergency meeting of the executive committee rather than the state central committee. They should have been brought before the state central committee, either at a regular or a specially called meeting. But it wasn't an emergency meeting because the plan for the approval of this was written in January, and they had programmed in the executive committee meeting to be May 2nd, the day before the plan was due on May 3rd. So there was no emergency. You can't plan out emergencies because emergencies are unexpected. Again, it is hard to even have a conversation if you're not speaking the same flavor of English. The other thing that went on was that the chair requested the Rules Committee to assess the validity of the delegate selection plan. And this was mentioned at the meeting in Prineville. But what is interesting is how this was done. So the chair ordered or requested the Rules Committee to do this work, but in reality, the chair has no authority to refer items to committees. So the way this is properly handled in a deliberative assembly is that the chair, if the chair would like to do something, would say, the chair would entertain a motion to refer the blah, blah, blah to the such and such committee. And then hearing no objection, we've done it. But that was not done. It was referred to the Rules Committee in the orders of the chair. Secondly, the Rules Committee is not chartered to interpret bylaws or give assessments. We saw the three things that the Rules Committee can do. The problem with the Rules Committee doing interpretations is that very few of the Rules Committee members are trained in interpreting bylaws. I doubt that a majority of the members even own a copy of the parliamentary procedure which governs the organization. I think the number of people who have studied it is under a half dozen, and I know of maybe 2 people that have actually studied it in a formal way with the National Association of Parliamentarians. The rest of them have been, picking up and randomly choosing selections from the parliamentary procedure, much like many people in the Christian faith do with the Bible, and they use their randomly chosen phrases to justify whatever position they wish to proceed with. So what happened with this interesting development? So on June 23rd, the Rules Committee was improperly called to meet to review a timeline of the creation of the delegate selection plan. Although the timeline was not completely reviewed, like we didn't even get all the way through it, nor did it prove anything. It was just a bunch of pieces of data that didn't really lead to any conclusion. The Rules Committee, or a majority of the Rules Committee, passed a motion validating the process of the creation of the delegate selection plan. So presumably, this is going to be brought back into the next State Central Committee and used as evidence of why the illegal process, which I just went through, was actually legal. And this is like looking at the horizon and saying, clearly the earth is not round because it is flat. And ultimately, this is why people hate to be abused by the misuse of Robert's rules. And ultimately, they hate parliamentary procedure because they just sit back and they see how they get screwed by these rules. And they're not really screwed by the rules, they're screwed by the breaking of the rules. And really, until you have leadership that, number one, understands the rules, and number two, doesn't see them as a weapon for imposing their will upon the organization, we're not going to have a Democratic Party that works in harmony. Any comments from the line, John?
Well, Betsy's here. Betsy?
Yeah, there are no questions. There are lots of comments, but no questions.
So how does the Democratic Party of Oregon get fixed? I, like many others, do not want to go to another meeting. I spent 5.5 hours getting to Prineville, and I sat there for 5.5 hours, and what we accomplished was the election of the members of the executive committee, which rarely meets, and is this very interesting entity that is pretty much ignored. But otherwise, nothing was done other than to have an adjourned meeting, and the adjourned meeting also was 2.5 hours, very painful, nothing got done. We need for the next meeting of the Democratic Party of Oregon State Central Committee to be a working meeting that is productive and people get something done. So these are the things that need to be done. The Democratic Party of Oregon leadership needs to conduct itself with uncompromising integrity. They need to conduct meetings properly. That means stating motions properly so that everyone understands what they're voting on. That means basically following proper procedure for meetings. If you look back at the videos of the meeting in Prineville, it was absolute chaos because no one really understood what was going on. People were voting in ways that they didn't understand. Motions were not stated correctly at any point in the meeting that I can find. Until a good chair explains to the membership what the effects of a no vote and what the effects of a yes vote are, and what happens when they vote that way. And if there are amendments to motions, the amendments are clearly stated, and the motion is stated in a way that people understand what will result with when they vote. None of that was done. This is actually not something easy to learn. It actually takes practice and training, and I don't see how anyone is going to acquire these skills within the foreseeable future who is running our meetings. But that's what has to happen. They have to conduct the meetings properly so people understand they're being treated fairly when they attend a state central committee meeting. The leadership needs to stop bending and breaking rules. Going to the admin committee, I thought, was bizarre because a majority of them voted that the adjourned meeting was an emergency meeting. Again, it's like arguing with the Flat Earth Society. How can you read rules and understand the meaning of the word emergency and then say that this was an emergency? They need to stop misrepresenting the truth. There is no way that, no matter who votes on it, that the development of the delegate selection plan was not an egregious breach of our rules of order. They need to treat, excuse me, the state central committee with the respect it deserves. Delegates travel up to 6 hours from all the corners of the state to attend these meetings, and the meetings tend to have little substance. What has happened over the years is that when they vote on pro forma things like the budget, or they vote on resolutions that have come to the resolutions committee, and everything else has been decided for them, whether or not the power to make those decisions has been given away. And finally, the Democratic Party of Oregon officers must operate within the authority given to them, not the authority that they have been taking. Any final comments that you'd like to share from the line, Betsy?
Well, Bram Sly one raises an issue of the whole point of this is to get us mired in the minutia of the details rather than working to actually resolve the real issues. So maybe you could address why trying to reform the Democratic Party is so important, because, you know, some of us, even myself, I work on issues, you know, that are not necessarily within the structure of how the party itself functions.
Well, there's a lot in there. So why this is important? So we, along with 56 other entities, will be sending delegates to the convention in July of 2020. And those people we send will be selecting the nominee who will run against Donald Trump. And if they pick the wrong one and the Democratic nominee loses, we have Donald Trump for 4 more years. And I don't need to explain the effects of that. I think everyone now understands about what happens when the Supreme Court gets packed. We have things like the gerrymandering decision of this last week, which was just mind-boggling. We now have to fight our way to clean up the way the districting process is done in the United States, because the Supreme Court says that what the political parties are doing to gerrymander is not illegal. In terms of issues for the Democratic Party, you know, if the Democratic Party was actually a strong organization and had influence with the Oregon legislature, our resolutions would have some effect when we pass them, and our party platform would have some effect. I think there are very few legislators in Salem who have read through the Oregon platform and certainly take it into consideration when they make a decision. The big influencers, from what I've observed, are all of the special interest groups that have their way with legislation before it even reaches a committee hearing. You know, it'd be great if the Democratic Party was part of that process, but I am not aware of anyone from the Democratic Party actually participating in the writing of legislation, except for a couple of random instances. I mean, you know, Rochelle Dixon attempted to change the way qualifications were written for water districts, but that got completely rolled over by other pre-committee conversations before it even turned into a piece of legislation. So why is it important? It's really more potential in terms of issues. It would be great if the Democratic Party had greater influence with the legislature, but it doesn't. Directly, who we send to the convention could possibly make a difference. This is the first convention in decades where it is possible that we do not know who the winner is going into the convention. And so the convention, the nominee for the convention will be decided on a subsequent round after the first round. And how those people vote will determine who the nominee is.
And if I remember my history correctly, the last time there was a brokered Democratic Party convention, we ended up with Richard Nixon as president of the United States. But Al Walsky asked, there doesn't seem to be any legal recourse when the leadership is corrupt, is there?
No. When we first came across this, we're going, what do we do? Can we go to the Secretary of State? No, they don't. They're not going to mire themselves in what is really a private organization. Can we go to the sheriff? No, they are really for enforcement of laws, and they can barely take care of, child abuse and spousal abuse and domestic violence and drug abuse, let alone worry about the goings on inside of an organization like the Democratic Party of Oregon. What we really need to do is elect ethical leadership that pledges and carries through that pledge of upholding the rules and not imposing their personal vision onto the party or channeling the vision of someone else. I've been told that the prior chair was told to not let them push her around, them being the state central committee delegates to the party. And that's a very interesting statement, because when we vote for something as members of the state central committee and we pass a motion to do something, we are not pushing around the leadership. The leadership should be delighted with an opportunity to carry out the will of the body. But I do not get that sense.
Hang on. Brom, you're missing the point here. Larry's talking about why it's important, but you're missing the power point here. It's not about legal. It doesn't matter if it's legal, everybody. There are 166 people that control an immense amount of power if those 166 people actually recognize that they had that power. And what they have to do is know the rules. The 166 members of the State Central Committee of Oregon are the most powerful group of people in the Democratic Party of Oregon. But they have to know their fucking rules. They have to understand how to do things. They have to work together, and they have to not be corrupt. And those people are elected by the very bottom rung of the Democratic Party. And that's where the power really starts, everybody. There's 166 people that could completely transform the Democratic Party in Oregon. That's it, 166 people. That's a small amount, but they have an immense power. They just don't want to use it or don't take it or don't recognize that they have it. And they're confused because they don't know the rules. That's what it comes down to. So it's not a loss. It's not a loss, Brom. The DNC is not a loss. State by state, the DNC is 100% controllable. All right? So there. That's why this is exciting.
As is the State Central Committee. So the State Central Committee is comprised of delegates elected from all 36 counties.
Yes.
And those are elected, just like John said, those are elected by the members of each county central committee. And what would be really great is if more people would show up who cared about the Democratic Party and was committed to cleaning it up. Every year we get a group of people that show up, and they think it's in fact, this is almost a direct quote from someone who joined this past year. He said, he thought he was joining a harmonious group to elect Democrats, and they got involved and they found out that it was just a dysfunctional mess. And now they are committed to getting it cleaned up. What we need is a couple of thousand Democrats, and then really it would just take a couple of thousand Democrats across the state to take that level of interest in the party, and we could get the Democratic Party of Oregon functioning again.
Yes, and just so you guys know, it's not just Oregon. Jose Caballero is doing this in California. And they have an insane state central committee of more than 3,000 people, and the executive committee that actually makes all the decisions of 300 plus. So they got a much larger task, but he's doing the exact same thing down there. So there's other groups.
And it needs to happen in the other 48 states.
It does.
And I'm going to add my 2 cents. I've not been a long time Democrat. I've actually been in the Peace and Freedom Party when I was in California. I was in the Pacific Green Party here, and have been most recently before Bernie a non-affiliated voter. This is the first time in the history of my political activism that I have some faith that the Democratic Party is the means to make progressive change, because third parties can't get it together. That's just the reality of what I've historically seen. So we have the means, we certainly have the means in Oregon to play our role in it. And the stuff Larry is teaching and folks are getting engaged in is unfortunately the only way it's going to be able to happen.
Anything else on the line, Betsy?
I don't see any questions.
So the next meeting of the State Central Committee is on August 11th, and it's going to be in Yamhill County, and we'll see if the leadership changes or if they want to continue on their path of destruction. Going on, we would like for you to take a survey, and we would like for you to share your predictions for the Oregon May 2020 primary. I put a poll out there. It's at www.oregonforbernie.org. And what I set up was a poll where you can guess which percentile bracket the major candidates will fall into according to your perception at this point in time. I would like to take this poll like every couple of months between now and the primary to see how opinion shifts. Now that we've gone through the debates and we've had all 20 major candidates on display, people have a perception of where the candidates are standing at. It would be interesting to know where people think it is going. In 2016, Bernie Sanders won Oregon by 56%, and Hillary won 44% of the vote. And this time, Oregon has a later primary, so it's going to happen in May, well after Super Tuesday, which is the beginning of March. We don't know what's going to happen. Either a few candidates are going to dominate the election coming out of Super Tuesday, or Super Tuesday is going to split so many votes that half a dozen candidates will limp forward to the primary. And if that case, Oregon could actually be fairly decisive as one of the later candidate states weighing in. But we would like to know what you think about it. So please go to the link that is in the upper right-hand corner of OregonForBernie.org. Click on the button and take the survey.
I'd be honest with you, Larry. I'm not going to take it until half of these people drop out. It's too long. Oh, Jesus. And him, and then it's like, no. Yeah. Really, is there any event that could happen before Super Tuesday that could knock a chunk of these people out? Because until there's like 10, it just seems silly. I'm just my opinion. That's all.
Yeah, and I love data, so
I know. There's not enough percentage for all these goddamn people. Anyway.
And going on, so now we're sort of wrapping up the show. Report harassment within the Democratic Party of Oregon. One of the things that has been going on is that we have members of the party being treated inappropriately. Does this make for a happy party? No. We need to treat everyone with respect and dignity and professionally. If you find yourself being subjected to some form of harassment or abuse, we would like you to go to pdpo.org and report it, and we will figure out a way to get the situation addressed. There are ways to address this at the State Central Committee, and there's ways to address this at the County Committee, and if nothing else, we can expose the behavior and get it stopped. But one of the positive things that happened in Prineville was that there were some very poor behaviors exhibited during the debate that day. And those things were taken back to the originating county of the delegates who behaved poorly, and they were dealt with. And that we need to do this every time this kind of behavior comes up. No one should be called a racist especially if they're not racists. No one should be yelled at because of something that they've done within the party when it's perfectly legal, and we still have free speech for now inside of the United States. So if you're being harassed or abused, we want to know about it, and we need to get it stopped, and we need to get it stopped now. If you are interested in learning about the rules of order so that you understand what your rights are and basically know when your rights are being taken away, there's a couple of ways to do it. We have about 21 videos posted at advancementofdemocracy.org. You can go and watch the videos. I've heard of people actually binge watching them, which I find just horrifying. But if you're not familiar with this material, perhaps this is a way to learn about it. And finally, get involved. If you are a supporter of Bernie Sanders, please go to OregonForBernie.org, and there's a number of things for you to do. We need leaders in these counties. So if you are a resident of Umatilla County, Hood River County, Wasco, Marion, Deschutes, or Jefferson, and especially if you are Native American or Hispanic, we would like to get you involved in the campaign for Bernie Sanders because we need your representation within the party. I'm a huge fan of diversity, and the more perspectives we can get involved in what's going on and how we go about electing Bernie Sanders will be all for the best. We have 3 opportunities to donate. So if you go to OregonForBernie.org, we have 3 GoFundMe programs going on. The one that we're focusing on now is to finish off the fundraising for bumper stickers. And what will happen is that once we get them printed, we will distribute them to the Oregon Bernie Sanders groups for free because they'll have been paid for, and then they can distribute them however they wish throughout the state. But these are custom bumper stickers, Oregon for Bernie, so it's a little bit more personal than just the national stickers for Bernie Sanders. We also have signs going up all over the state. They're being done by the sign artist Brian Heath. They are really cool. They're 4 by 8 foot signs, and we place them along major roadways, especially in rural Oregon. And it's basically advertising for Bernie Sanders. And we have a goal of having 100 of them placed. What Brian does is he goes into the community and he makes the creation of the signs a community involvement project. So all of the local Bernie Sanders supporters can get together and work on the project and get the signs painted and installed. You can also contribute. So it only takes $27 to pay for the materials for these signs. Brian donates his labor. I have no idea what he does for a living, but he donates his time for the creation of these signs. And this is a great way of supporting Bernie as we get closer to the primary. And the third way is to support our delegates. So based on the percentage of votes that Bernie Sanders will get in the Oregon primary, it'll determine how many delegates will be sent to Wisconsin to support him. The election of delegates is mid-June and the convention is in mid-July. So there is no time to run the sort of GoFundMe campaigns that we did in 2016, which was the way many people was able to pay their expenses. So what we're doing is that we are collecting donations now so that anyone who is elected delegate is not prevented from going because they don't come up with roughly $2,200 it takes to attend a convention. The convention expenses are not paid for by the Democratic Party of Oregon. In fact, we end up paying a couple of $100s in just for miscellaneous expenses for the running of the convention by each delegate. So that's what we are raising the money for. And there is a sign, there's a slide for the signs. So again, just $27 will produce one of these really great signs for Bernie Sanders.
I ran through all these.
Okay.
You got way too many advertisements at the end of the show. It's just too much stuff.
Am I turning into a Corbett whore?
It's basically. And also, before we go, and one more thing.
And I'm going to catch up with you. So
we're at Bernie Products. I think we were at Bernie Products. Here.
So Uphill Media has created some really cool Bernie products, along with the shirts that the Two Chicks Conspiracy produces. If you would like to order your Bernie products from Uphill Media, you can do that from two places. You can go to the OregonForBernie.org site, which has a link, or you can go to the Uphill Media site and find the merch link. Excuse me. What's really cool is that you can choose your color. So there's probably 20 colors for these different products that you could have the images printed on. And then you have various styles. You can have hoodies or t-shirts, caps, whatever you'd like, and have them shipped to you. We don't carry inventory, so we have this great service that prints them to order and will ship them to you. And there's actually a sale going on right now, so you get a 20% discount if you buy that stuff before July 1st. Any day now, we are going to start parliamentarytalk.org. This is where a friend of mine and I will have a show similar to Car Talk and Philosophy Talk, where we take issues that people have that involve parliamentary procedure in their organization and help them work their way through it. One of the problems with teaching this material is that it's really dry and boring until you have a problem. And then it becomes fascinating because you have to work your way through the rules to figure out how to dig yourself out. I had a group contact me recently who had their annual meeting, but they didn't achieve a quorum, and they had some really interesting rules in their bylaws that ended the term of their officers immediately. And so they were wondering, how do they legally proceed forward, because they're a nonprofit and they wanted to make sure that they were doing things properly so they don't end up endangering their nonprofit status. So I was able to read through their situation and give them some advice. And this is what we will do with this show, so that people can understand how to use the book, Robert's Rules of Order, and the bylaws, and then if it makes a difference, the Oregon statutes, for figuring out how to proceed forward. If you go to parliamentarytalk.org, you can subscribe to meeting notices. And if you would like to join a study group, so we've established a virtual study group for the study of this material, which is now the largest group in Oregon. We have 5 people that are on track to take the exam to become actual members of the National Association of Parliamentarians. And we would love to help anyone in the audience who would like to study this stuff. And finally, if you would like to get involved, please go to advancementofdemocracy.org, and all of this stuff will be made available to you. That's the end of our show today. John, is there anything you'd like to add?
No, it's like 5 websites to go to get involved for different things. You really got
probably need to consolidate.
You need to condense this. We're going to condense the ending together. But thank you, Larry. I have a question for you. Are there any other, besides you being a registered parliamentarian, are there any other registered parliamentarians on the Rules Committee of the DPO that you're aware of? And are you on the Rules Committee? I can't remember. Are you or not?
Yes.
You are on the Rules Committee. Okay, so...
Yeah, I'm the only registered parliamentarian. So we have Carrie Capon, who is about halfway through the process of becoming a registered parliamentarian.
Okay.
I believe that is it.
But the chair of the Rules Committee is not a registered parliamentarian. Right?
No, he's studied it and he's passingly familiar with it, but he doesn't. He's not studied it, and he's not in any way a member of the National Association of Parliamentarians, or is he registered?
This, I mean, right there is a fundamental issue with democracy.
Well, the chair that was appointed 2 years ago, as well intended as she was, when I first met her, I said, it would be really great if you got this book and studied it because you're going to need it. And she said, is it on Kindle? And I go, no, they haven't produced an electronic version yet. She says, well, I think I'll just wait until I can get it on my Kindle. Didn't do her any good. And her tenure as chair ended up being very painful because things would be dropped. We would discuss something in one meeting and they wouldn't be properly handled, and so we'd show up at the next meeting and they wouldn't be on the agenda. All that stuff is governed by Robert's Rules of Order. So when people bring up issues, they don't get buried. And it's just, it's the way that everyone's rights are protected. And she didn't care enough about it to learn the basic procedures, and she ended up resigning because it was such a painful group to administer.
Right. Oh. That's the point. We may think this is terrible, and I this stuff is minutia and meticulous, but if we don't learn it, then the elites use it to crush us. That's it.
Yeah, it's just like the illegally called special meeting of the Rules Committee. I mean, what an abuse of authority. We just, after the meeting, those of us who were amongst the abusees were just flabbergasted that they would try to pull this kind of crap at this point after all the things that we've complained about. It just unrelenting.
Yeah, and it just makes me even more pissed because there was a I don't even know what a rule, a motion moved forward by the Rules Committee or by you, SR 13, that would have created a provision for electronic meetings so that we could have possibly conducted one that wasn't garbage, but there wasn't anybody actually working that, right? I mean, that was just more. That whole thing to me was a problem, that they couldn't even do that. Let's approve some rules for electronic meetings before we have one. Just a thought.
Highly recommended in our parliamentary authority because it protects you from this kind of stuff. I mean, what I've come to realize is that voting is one of the primary rights that you have within an assembly if you were a member. And so if you have a voting system that doesn't count your vote, you are being screwed. And the parliamentary authority clearly states that if you have a electronic voting system, it has to be approved, and we have never approved the Maestro system for voting. And so going forward, we're going to object to the use of that system until someone comes up with a better way of validating the votes other than roll calls.
Right.
And I tell you, roll call voting with 133 people is not a pleasant experience.
No. And the whole thing we're going through with this, if you haven't seen the video I posted on Facebook with Jamie McLeod Skinner, is that the non-rules committee that approved the delegate selection plan that was appropriate includes plurality voting, which Larry's been talking about forever and ever. This is going to happen in states across the nation, and yes, it does affect Bernie Sanders' chances of becoming president of the United States. It's all comes back around. It's terrible. Anyway, awesome show, Larry. Thank you. Anything else?
No, thank you, John. Thank you, Betsy.
Yeah. All right, everybody, we're going to get out of here with something I thought was absolutely appropriate today because it's Tony Tigg and his new song for Bernie 2020. And I just love the beginning of this because this is really the attitude that we need to take as the SEC, as members of the Democratic Party, whatever. No, I will not yield. Listen to Bernie Sanders say it at the beginning of this. It's awesome. It's so Bernie.
But here's the good news, everyone. He'll never be president. Absolutely not.
In case you don't know, the American people hold the President of the United States in contempt. They hold the Republican Party in contempt. They hold the Democratic Party in contempt. And no, I won't yield. The American people want to see our kids educated. Let's have the guts to give some leadership to this country.
Yeah. All I hear's a lot of rhetoric, a bunch of sellouts still trying to be the president, lining up their pockets with that Wall Street money. Now they trying to throw dirt until we all get muddy, but I'ma make them quack, make them squeal, rubber ducky. In 2016, you Bernie haters got lucky. Now it's almost 2020, it's about to get ugly. I'ma knock on every door and now I don't care who gon' judge me now. Cause we've been fighting nepotism, all these leaders in position, all these prisons, pay attention. They don't wanna feel the burn, they try to hustle the competition. Name another politician that you know that this consistent. This persistence for the people, education, make a difference. Yeah, the fight for 15 and equality for women, comprehensive immigration and a real black agenda. Medicare for all, yeah, you start to get the message. Standing tall, our revolution's calling for the rights of all. No dreams too big or small for me. Standing tall, our revolution's calling for the
Don't you worry about the swag. Matter of fact, you can put it on my tab. We counting every vote, they think they got it in the bag. $27 and they still getting mad. So progressive and we never gon' let up. Burn the establishment, I'm screaming from the neck up. This is our time, this is our fight. These are my kids, this is my life. This ain't about the left, this ain't about the right. Nobody cares if your MAGA hat's on tight. Your little baby still yelling for the wall still, while the poor still trying to pay their light bill. 40 hours got them begging for a living wage. Vietnam vets still trying to see a better day. Instead of crying in the ocean full of misery, we gon' stand tall with the burn making history.
Senator Sanders stood up when he didn't have to stand up as a young man. The way to define the character of a person is what they do when the cameras are not on, what they do when they don't benefit from it personally. He is a champion for civil rights and social justice in this country. The time is right and the cause is now. Senator Sanders understands that we as a country, black, white, Asian, Native American, young, seasoned, Muslim, Christian, Jew, Gentile, atheist, all of us together. All of us together.
Revolutions calling for the rights of all. No dreams too big or small for me. Standing tall, our revolutions calling for the rights of all. No dreams too big or small for me.
What's going to be different this time?
We're going to win.